So just around a week ago, DeMar DeRozan and Nate Robinson went on Instagram Live, and DeMar told him the very reasonable statement, which is that
he the best Raptor of all time.
Yeah, he's up there for sure.
Period.
Now, DeMar himself is at least a top 5 player in franchise history, so this isn't coming from a nobody. And that prompted some discussion on NBA Twitter, and like accounts like Ball is Life and Hoops Legion posted it. And the replies, the replies were terrible. All right, like let me just show you.
It's no secret that I get disgusted by a lot of things. I'm very disgusted, to be quite honest with you. I'm just so disgusted.
I can't tell you how disgusted I am.
I'm disgusted with it. I'm so disgusted. I'm disgusted with it. I'm so disgusted. I'm so damn disgusted. I'm just disgusted. Oh, I'm just trying to be cool, but I'm just so disgusted.
Look, this isn't to be disrespectful, and I don't expect people to know everything about the Raptors. I really don't. We don't get much media coverage outside of Canada and all that stuff, and I genuinely don't really care if people outside of Canada care about the Raptors or not. Regardless of that, I just hope that people will have kind of an unbiased view while watching this. So if you do feel, and be honest with yourself, if you do feel that you don't know a lot about Kyle Lowry and you just kind of slander him just for jokes, please, I just advise you to go watch the first video I ever uploaded on this channel. It's called Kyle Lowry, the most misunderstood and underrated player of the decade. And if you're gonna be completely unbiased while watching it, I guarantee you that it'll at least sway your opinion maybe a little bit. So I'm gonna talk about 5 different players here, one of which is not Pascal Siakam. I do think that Pascal Siakam is the 6th best Raptor of all time, which normally would mean he would be on a list like this. But just because I saw so much of Tracy McGrady on it, I just felt the need to address it. So I won't be talking about Pascal Siakam. Not a lot of people, even like the Lowry slanderers, don't even think that Pascal Siakam is a better Raptor than Lowry all time. People understand that he, wasn't really a big part of the team up until last season. So you can't really, make that claim, regardless of how much you hate him. But I'm gonna break like the arguments down for each individual player that I'm going to show you. So one thing I want to make clear is there is a very big difference between best player for a certain franchise and greatest player for a certain franchise. So if you don't know what I mean, when talking about, say, the Miami Heat, Dwayne Wade is clearly the greatest player in franchise history. There's no debating that. But LeBron is the best player that they ever had. This is a distinction that people fail to make with the Raptors when talking about Kawhi Leonard or Vince Carter in comparison to Lowry. In no way, shape, or form are people saying that Lowry is better than prime Vince Carter, and nobody especially is talking about Lowry being better than Kawhi Leonard for that one season that he was with us. No one is debating that. But when you're talking about the greatest of all time for a franchise, you normally bring longevity into the conversation, and that's what a lot of people just fail to realize. So, a reasonable basis to rank someone's greatness for a specific franchise, I consider all of these factors in no particular order, which is accolades and team success, player performance at his peak, or even just looking at his entire body of work with the team, and then longevity, legacy, and impact, which also includes like rankings on the all-time leaderboards and stuff like that. So now that this is understood, I'm going to get T-Mac off of this list because it's bothering me. I'm gonna make this as quick as possible because there's no reason for him even to be in this discussion. His best season as a Raptor wasn't even as good as Lowry's worst. He won no accolades, and he didn't make it out of the first round. He's a 0 for that. Like I said, his peak statistics with the Raptors, not really good. Again, worse than Lowry's worst season. So he loses out on those two, and he only played 3 seasons in Toronto, so he loses any kind of longevity argument. Like, no disrespect to one of the greatest scorers ever, but he simply does not belong here. So time to get to the real candidates. And as much as it pains me to say this, he was the first player I ever became a fan of, but Chris Bosh, in my opinion, is the clear 4th person on this list. I want to put him at 3 badly, but the absolute lack of team success that he had while in Toronto is definitely what, puts him down. Obviously, the lack of team success was not his fault. He never really had an above average supporting cast, which is a shame But when talking about the greatest players for a franchise of all time, it has to be held against them because he never really won anything at all, like not even a playoff series. In terms of accolades with the team, Lowry made 6 All-Star games with the Raptors, Bosh only made 5. Again, Bosh never made it out of the first round with us, and Lowry led the Raptors to the Eastern Conference Finals in the 2016 playoffs. So from a player performance perspective, I think Bosh being a power forward and center and Lowry being a true point guard, it's hard to compare the two. Bosh was a better scorer, I think it's safe to say that, but scoring isn't even Lowry's forte, and the gap isn't even that big. So Lowry's 3 best scoring seasons as a Raptor are almost as good as Chris's 3 best if you're just looking at everything. And when you factor in that Lowry was by far the best playmaker in franchise history, he's much better than him when looking at overall offense, not just scoring. Chris was a better defender than Lowry, I'll obviously give him that, but Kyle is one of the best defenders, being 6 feet tall or under, so he's an above average defender. It's not that the gap is massive. Comfortably, Chris Bosh is the better defender, but that's not to say that Lowry isn't an above average defender, because he is. Lowry is higher than Chris in almost every single major franchise stat, except for blocks, rebounds, obvious center things, and points, which if the season didn't get canceled, Lowry would probably pass him in points this season, and he still has at least 1 more year with the Raptors after this one. So safe to say that he would pass Chris Bosh in the all-time scoring list when it's all said and done. It's clear that Lowry had more impact on winning and more notability with the franchise. The Raptors have had 7 seasons where they won 48 games or more, and Lowry has been on all of them. He was the best player on the team for at least 4 of those seasons, and for those who disagree, I'll get into that later when I talk about the 3rd person in this video. But for now, let's just get into the next player in question, which is Vince Carter. So picking Vince above the next guy in this video was also kind of hard, but I could comfortably say that when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, he definitely wasn't as relevant as the next person. And that's again because of a lot of longevity reasons. But again, this is one of those cases where obviously Vince Carter is a better player than Lowry. No one is debating that. So I'm just gonna get that out of the way first. Vince Carter definitely gets the point here for, peak performance with the Raptors. But Vince is not only just behind Lowry, but multiple other players as well on this list. And this isn't just because of Vince's prime, because that wouldn't be the reason. If Vince stayed on the insane projection that he was on as a young player, he wouldn't just be one of the best players in Raptors franchise history, he'd be one of the best players in the league. A lot of people don't know this, but he averaged almost 26 a game as a sophomore, and then he ticked that up to 27.6 points per game while still being a very efficient player. It was the same season where he led the Raptors to that playoff series against the 76ers in 2001, and he was essentially a shot away from making it to the Eastern Conference Finals where they'd play the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, a lot of people who weren't around to see it, a lot of people would think that the Raptors were just like mildly successful with Vince Carter in the early 2000s after that playoff series loss. But no, the Raptors were just awful. And that's partly because of injuries, and again, something out of Vince Carter's control, but you can't, place that on him. No one puts Derrick Rose higher on the all-time Bulls list because what could have happened if he didn't go down with an injury. They value him based on what he did on the court, which was a lot, but definitely not what he was entirely capable of if he didn't go down with that injury. And then when Vince was healthy, he took a huge step back production-wise and efficiency-wise. Like, just look at these stats, it's not enough. And there's a lot of controversy and not a lot of information on how Vince Carter left Toronto, whose fault it was exactly. There obviously was parts on both sides that are responsible for it. So I'm not even gonna include that in the video. It's just the simple fact that he didn't produce for these multiple years, and he only had 2 really notable seasons with the Raptors where they didn't get anywhere further than the 2nd round. So next up we got DeMar DeRozan. He's the only person who's really competing with Lowry for the most beloved Raptor of all time title. He was the definition of a fan favorite. He embraced the city, he was loyal, he gave Raptors fans plenty of moments that we'll never forget. But there is a huge misunderstanding even amongst casual Raptors fans that DeMar was always our best player, when he really was only our best player in 2017 and maybe 2018. Here are the 3 seasons before 2017 where Kyle and DeMar made the playoffs. So obviously in 2015-16, the scoring discrepancy is not huge. only up by 2 points per game is DeMar DeRozan, but the efficiency stats are a bit better for Lowry, and obviously he's more well-rounded of a player, you know, more rebounds and more assists, and he's a much better defender than DeMar DeRozan. For those who don't know, I don't know how he's doing with the Spurs right now defensively. I haven't really been paying that much attention to him, but on the Raptors, he was solidly a below average defender. He had the tools to be a good defender, but he just wasn't a good defender. So when you take account into all of that, Lowry was not by much, but our best player. And then in 2014-15, again, DeRozan, our better scorer, you know, production-wise. But efficiency-wise, Lowry, again, is slightly better than him. And he, again, blows him out in the other categories as well. And here in 2013-14, again, you're seeing the same thing. Much better in pretty much everything except for scoring production. Now, for those who didn't listen to me and still didn't watch my Kyle Lowry video, the narrative that Kyle Lowry is a playoff choker is stupid, especially when comparing him to DeMar DeRozan. So in the playoffs, for every single season where they played together, Lowry is beating him in, again, every single category except for scoring production. And in this case, the discrepancy between the two efficiency-wise is much larger. Lowry, being a 6-foot-tall point guard, is shooting a higher field goal percentage than him, and obviously shooting better from three. He's averaging more assists, rebounds, all that. And again, being the much better defender. So there is a huge difference between being the #1 scoring option and the best player on the team. It's something that a lot of people don't really make a correlation with, and I don't understand why. Now, DeMar is ahead of Vincent Bosch for the same reason that Kyle is ahead of Vincent Bosch. Longevity and relevancy with the franchise is important, and he has many more winning seasons in comparison to those two, and dominates almost all of the Raptors' all-time leading lists. He's the all-time leader in scoring for the Raptors. Even though Kyle has a chance of getting him, it's fairly likely that he holds on to it. But then again, Lowry beats him out in almost every other all-time category for the Raptors: assists, steals, rebounds, anything you would probably ask for, he would beat him in. And again, one thing that I haven't mentioned in this video yet because I didn't even need to, which is Kyle Lowry's championship ring, which brings us to the next player, and the one player who I think can legitimately challenge Kyle when talking about this, and that's Kawhi Leonard. I honestly don't blame people for thinking Kawhi is the best Raptor of all time. Kawhi against the 76ers was probably the greatest player I've ever seen in a certain playoff series. It was crazy how good he was playing that series, and we 1000% would have lost without him. But this is something that a lot of Raptors fans feel strongly about, and it's that people say that Kyle Lowry didn't deserve his ring. So obviously, Lowry got quote-unquote carried by Kawhi Leonard because Lowry isn't going to be the first option on a championship team scoring wise or even just generally. No one thinks that. Saying that he didn't deserve that ring was ridiculous because people just look at, like, you know, the donut he put up against the Magic and like a couple of games that he struggled, you know, in the finals and in the 76ers series. When you look at the entire playoff run, he played really well. He was the second most important player on the offense throughout the entire playoff run. And yes, I said important, not the second scoring option. Pascal Siakam has the same argument against him that DeMar DeRozan has. Yes, Pascal Siakam was probably higher on the pecking order in terms of scoring as opposed to Lowry during the entire playoff run. But even then, the discrepancy wasn't that big, and Lowry was better than him in almost every other facet of the game. So here are the numbers from the 2019 playoffs. Lowry, again, averaging less production-wise. Pascal Siakam actually had a pretty bad postseason performance when you're looking at it efficiency-wise in comparison to what he was showing us in the regular season. Lowry, again, blowing him out in assists, which is a huge thing that no one talks about. Kyle Lowry orchestrated that team. Kyle Lowry is the reason why Kawhi Leonard was able to be so successful. Lowry is one of the best playmakers of the entire decade. Again, watch my first video. I will explain exactly why in that one if you don't believe me. And without Kyle Lowry in the Milwaukee Bucks series, we probably would have lost. It was the most efficient basketball I've ever seen him play for that Eastern Conference Finals series, all while being guarded by Eric Bledsoe, who's first team all defense. These are his stats. Extremely efficient, still moving the ball around just as much as he used to. And again, even production-wise, he was pretty good. In the finals, again, he wasn't as good as he was in the Bucks series, but he averaged 16 and 7 pretty efficiently. And in Game 6, the most important game of his career, he was the best player on the team. Anyone who watched that game, and even if you ask Kawhi Leonard himself, he would tell you that Kyle Lowry was the best player in that closeout game. He put up 26 points, a team high, and 10 assists, along with being 3 rebounds away from a triple-double in a closeout finals game. So again, if you don't think he deserved that ring and you think he's a playoff choker, just look at the evidence because you're hating in light of evidence. So now that that's cleared up, let's return to Kawhi Leonard. Yes, he was amazing, but the carry job he put in was grossly exaggerated. Aside from the 76ers series, he had one of the best defensive teams of the decade on his side. He had a very efficient young scorer in Pascal Siakam and one of the best playmakers in the playoffs, Kyle Lowry. Regardless of what you think will look like come playoff time, it cannot be understated how the Raptors have the third best record in the NBA without Kawhi Leonard. Everyone penciled us in as a low playoff seed at the beginning of the season, and no one is even giving Lowry just a smidgen of credit. So now that that's settled, let's talk about what Kyle does have on Kawhi Leonard in terms of franchise relevancy. Kawhi obviously only played one season in Toronto, and again appears nowhere on the franchise all-time leading lists, scoring, rebounds, anything. He does not show up in any of them. Again, it's because he only played one season, but you have to consider that. Longevity is important. If Kawhi stayed for probably 2 or 3 more years, he would by far probably be the best player in franchise history, but that's just not the case. When you only play 84 total games for a franchise, it's extremely hard to be given the title as best player in franchise history, especially when you're being put up against someone of Kyle Lowry's resume. Kyle Lowry has been through it all as a Raptor. Kyle arrived in Toronto in a bad situation in a losing season. He turned that into 6 All-Star appearances and a multitude of 50-plus win seasons, a 2016 playoff campaign where he led the Raptors to their first Eastern Conference Finals appearance, and he suited up for 549 games for the Raptors, in which he drained almost 1,400 of his 1,700 triples, good for the 23rd most in NBA history. He leads the Raptors all-time in assists, which contributed to most of his 3,600 career assists, which is top 50 all-time. So does one season of greatness from Kawhi Leonard really trump everything Lowry has done for this franchise? I just don't think so. And if you disagree with me, that's fine, but make sure you let me know in the comments, and if you respond rationally and respectfully, I'll probably respond to you. Like I said, Kawhi is without a doubt the best player to ever put on the Raptors uniform, but no one has been more relevant to the franchise than Kyle Lowry. And to me, that's what makes him the greatest Raptor. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe. I don't only make Raptors content, I cover the entire NBA. So you guys stay safe, and I'll catch you guys later.
Justin, bring the heat. Justin, bring the heat. Justin, bring the heat. Justin, bring the heat.